Yes, this system is devouring itself and all of you. Let's build something else. And that's the only thing that can work at this late stage hour of capitalism, because we all know we are like on the edge, on a precipice of total effing collapse. And now the aliens are here. So, you know,
the aliens have entered the chat.
The aliens have entered the chat just in time for Brat Girl winter, I guess. Hello and welcome. This is Down to Astro. I'm Chani Nicholas.
I'm Thea Anderson.
And I'm Eliza Robertson.
We are recording this episode on November 18th. So we are post-election. In this podcast, if you're new to it, we talk about the astrology of what just happened and then what just happened also in the world. And we talk about a little bit of what's to come as well. But like everybody in the world, we are doing a post-mortem, a grieving session, a reflection section or reflection episode, I should say, on the election. So we did a lot of work on the charts of the two candidates. We did a lot of work on the astrology surrounding the election. We did a little bit of work on the astrology of Inauguration Day. We spent a lot of episodes kind of talking about how this moment might roll out and what the astrology might say. And I think it's important just for us to take a moment as human beings to talk about how it felt to have done that work on those episodes and then to have lived through and be living through the results of the actual election. Because you can pontificate with a great amount of like, I don't know, like a feeling of like, not certainty. I don't think any of us actually ever feel certain when we're talking about the future of us and the future and the astrology of it. But like, you don't have to be living through the consequences of it yet. So you can talk about it. You can make fun of things. You can, riff on things. And then you actually live through the event and you're like, oh, okay, well, that's how the thing is. So I just wanted to kind of open the episode with like, how you doing? How you feeling? What's going on for you both on kind of like a personal level, but also in terms of what we've said here and what has been happening here.
Oh, that's the perfect setup. Like what has been happening? I mean, I think this is 13 days out from the election, and it feels as if personally I'm collecting myself. What does this mean? I feel like, and I was telling you this a little bit, like my analysis brain wanted to turn on right away. And then it just felt like too much. And my analysis brain, meaning as an astrologer, like where could I have seen this, right? As all that work we did together individually, being in the news, looking at all these different timing techniques, and then to live through time it's you take your whole self with you, and you take your family with you and your community with you. And then when you get to that time that you've sort of looked at from the past, it's really like, what do I do now? What do I do with this? And so there was a little bit for me personally, a sense of what does it mean to be an astrologer who loves to talk about the world, who loves to talk about the past and loves to talk with you about what could this all mean on a collective level, and to have lived through something that was incredibly devastating and not surprising. Means like where I think what I'm sitting with now is like, where is there room for hope always? Even when you're looking at something and I think hope has to get into analysis is kind of what I'm sitting with currently today. And it's probably the only way I want to keep doing this on, just as a practice as an astrologer, is to always have hope. And even if it means it makes, it's not pure analysis, it might be subjective. It just feels like a hopeful place to sit from, a better place, I guess.
I think we were hopeful. Well, speaking for myself, I think I had, in one of the last episodes we did, we really broke down the transits and compared them to what we called a technique that's called annual perfections. And it seemed unambiguous that Trump was in a better place by transit. I mean, he literally had Venus. Yeah, he literally had Venus, which is one of the two benefic planets, transiting his moon on the day of the election. That happens once a year. It's not insanely rare, but it's also a pretty sweet thing. And it happened to fall on one of the biggest days of the year for him. So there was that. But I think, speaking again for myself, I was unwilling to make that the full story.
Yes.
Which is why, and I do think there's something to be said for what happens in January, looking at, again, specifically how Trump's annual perfections work out with what's transiting. And that's something I think leaned a lot on in the last episode, because I didn't really want to accept that he could actually win.
Yeah.
And I don't know that I was in denial as much as like what you said, Thea. I was just sort of clinging on to the hope of it all, which can feel remedial and it can feel medicinal, but it can also lead to incredible disappointment and devastation, which I think is where we've landed as well. Not saying it's not necessary, but yeah.
I mean, Chani, I was thinking about you because you said the other day that you were a public astrologer in 2016. And so I was just wondering, like, how this felt. I don't know. Was it different for you? You were like, oh no, I lived this. I lived through time. I know this happened. Like, I was wondering how it showed up for you, having lived through this moment as a public astrologer the last time around.
I mean, I don't know if I did any like direct, like deep analysis or prediction about who would win. What I felt with this moment was, obviously, going into the election, just a deep grief and a feeling of like, how is this going to turn out because of Gaza? So I was entering it like, I think all of us were, like a lot of us were like, okay, man, this is like an impossible pill to swallow. And we have to block Trump at all costs. So I felt similarly complex about Hillary in 2016. Like, Bernie was a whole other thing. And then you're like, okay, well, we've got Hillary. And I felt similarly as, like both very establishment, very complicated history in terms of war and in other countries, and being a part of things that, don't actually add up to any kind of just and fair world that we definitely need to build. This is what I feel like. In the face of fascism, you cannot serve up a center liberalism as an opposition. So the Mars-Pluto opposition that happened right before election is a signature of an epic effing battle. And if you do not have the equal and opposite force in a battle of that signature, you are going to be decimated. If in the face of fascism, you have a genocide on your queue, on your tablet, on whatever's being added up against you, plus you are not addressing the rage of the people that is very justified. So we have a country of people that are deeply angry about a variety of things. And you have one party that says you're angry and you're right. And this is why. And they blame immigrants, they blame women, they blame queer folks, they blame all the things that they shouldn't blame, all the evil things that they can do to justify people's anger, they do. In the face of that, you can't say, but it's all okay, it's getting better. You have to say, yeah, you are angry and you have a right to be because money has entered politics in a way that is unconscionable, that is a way that is a threat to democracy. You cannot lie at all in the face of fascism. You cannot cover for the establishment in the face of fascism. You have to say, you know what, you're right, because anything that is unaddressed is a wide open door for a dictator to just breeze on through and light everything up. So I had the same unease in 2016 that I had now. It's just that as all of us that are adults, we've lived through both things. So it was like, this doesn't look good. I don't like the astrology of the election. And I got swept up in the like, maybe reproductive rights, maybe. And then we can fight them on Palestine and we can fight them on everything else. And I got swept up in my own social media bubble of like, oh, it looks really good. Looks like there's a lot of good things happening. Okay, like maybe this is a death nail in the MAGA coffin. But it wasn't. It was a death nail in the Democratic Party's coffin. Like, I don't think many people maybe did, but I think in general, like public, people didn't understand how insufficient this is. And then it's like I said on Instagram stories a little while ago, it's like you have a white nationalist dictator who just ran for president and won second term. And against him, you had a old white man who is living in the past, who said he was going to come in to usher in a new era of politics, but instead clung to power until the fucking 11th hour and then handed the hot mess to a Black South Asian woman for her to take the fall for the party. You know, so just on like every level, my mind splits apart in rage at the establishment and how seemingly like that you could see this coming from miles away, but we had to do what we could do to try to salvage everything that we could salvage. And I sit in that. I sit in this pile of wreckage of like, whoa, everyone's saying that he won because of the price of eggs, but then he's going to put all these tariffs on everything and no one's going to be able to afford anything. And but we live in this culture where in this world where there's multiple realities and none of them are sharing the same story. Mm-hmm. And we've all let it get here because of corporate capitalistic greed and because of every party's involvement with that. And we don't have an anti-establishment party that's actually for the working people. We have an anti-establishment party that is for billionaires and oligarchy, but we don't actually have something that is for folks, migrant folks, poor folks that are disabled folks, parents. Like we don't have any kind of governmental base or home that is like, yes, this system is devouring itself and all of you. Let's build something else. And that's the only thing that can work at this late stage hour of capitalism, because we all know we are like on the edge, on a precipice of total effing collapse. And now the aliens are here. So, you know,
the aliens have entered the chat.
The aliens have entered the chat just in time for brat girl winter, I guess. You know, no. It's just like, and I was so in such deep, I mean, a lot of people, like, I know I've been having a lot of like dreams about some really gnarly situations and just feeling the depths of despair. And now I've kind of like flipped over into like, okay, welcome the chaos. Like, here we are. How do we fight this? Looking at the astrology, looking at the moment, and just feeling like an absolute and utter resolve in myself to not be obliterated and sidetracked by this ridiculous amount of nonsense that's about to come in, because we know he's going to hire and fire people like he dyes his skin, which is frequently. Anyways, that's my very long-winded way of saying I'm great. Thanks for asking.
Well, and like, we've talked about this and we'll keep talking about it, but we've talked about it off screen. We've talked about it in person recently, but we're entering a year that astrologically is one of the biggest and one of the banner years, one of the years where everything seems to change, where all of the slow moving planets change signs, or at least many of them. And so a new landscape is being formed next year.
Yeah.
And this is going to be a dominant flavor or shaping tool and how that is contoured, which I think speaks to also what you're saying, Chani, that there needs to be a force rising in an equal and opposite way, in a countering direction, to make sure that the tyranny does not, utterly take over. I mean, it's doing a damn good job so far, but it does need to be met with again, an equal and opposing force. And I think that's the hope I draw from this, that maybe people on the left can actually recognize that these sort of middling, mainstream, towing the party line, middle of the road, courting conservatives, that this kind of look for the party is not actually going to A, win an election, or B, create the change that we need. And that maybe some new figure, new force, new like upswell of energy can rise from those ashes, from the ashes that we now have around us. And I think we're a long way from that, but that's my hope, I think, taking
Maybe
away.
This expedited it. It's just like, let it die. Like, if we're talking about Mars, Pluto, and the way that it switches over from Mars and Cancer opposing Pluto and Capricorn, and then we'll get Mars and Leo opposing Pluto and Aquarius. I feel like that the new fight is kind of like signified in that way. Like, you kind of have to be, what rallies people is a fucking defeat.
Yeah.
Like this is not the way forward. And you have to be shown the limitations of old ways of doing things to really understand like what the new strategy is.
Yeah.
Yeah. I know we'll get into all that, but
yeah. So let's just parse out the Mars Pluto a little bit. So Mars was in Cancer at the very last degree of Cancer, opposing Pluto at the last degree of Capricorn on November 3rd, right before the election. And then by the election, Mars went into Leo, which is also Trump's first house. So remember when Mars went into Gemini, into Kamala Harris's first house, she was handed the torch by Biden. And so as Mars goes into Trump's house, the first house of self, he claims victory. So the Mars Pluto of it all. Now, I just want to also say, like I said everywhere, that the Mars Pluto, is a signature of possibly something being stolen. So I thought that the election was going to be drawn out. I thought it was going to be close. I thought they were going to try to say that, they were trying to say that it had been stolen before it even happened. So we thought that the thing of theft would happen. Now, I will say there's a lot of conspiracy theories on the left that Trump did steal the election because it's just too much of a sweep. I'm not going to try to spread conspiracy theories anywhere. But just in case the aliens want to, divulge some secret information that they might have, also here for it. Again, I'd like some receipts. But anyways, it looked like that kind of like what is going on under the surface. Again, I'm reframing that as an epic battle that, yes, something will get stolen, like your goddamn country, if you do not have the right kind of force to meet your opponent. So I think that's how I feel about the signature now, unless something else gets revealed and is shown. But I do think that that's how it rolled out. So then on January 2nd, Mars will still be in Leo because it will be retrograde by then. Will oppose Pluto a second time. And then the end of April, mid-April.
I think it's the 26th.
26th of April Mars and Pluto will oppose each other one more time. So this really is a signature from the beginning of November to the end of April that we're working in. And because this really like massively important election happened at the onset, the first inciting incident, we know that there's something about it that rolls through until April. We just don't know how yet. I thought maybe they were going to be in legal battles until then about the election. I don't even know if that's possible, but I was like, I don't know, maybe that's a thing. So I'm not exactly, we'll have to like live through it to see exactly how it happens. But Thea, maybe this is what you're saying, like Leo is a sign of leadership. And if Mars is up against Pluto, then it's like the leader up against, Pluto and Aquarius is kind of maybe the people or the aliens or the robots, the masses. So I don't know, maybe it will, I don't know if this is what you're saying, but maybe it will stoke the resistance that is needed to have actual real transformation.
Yeah, I think I am saying that. And I think I'm saying, like, we're not going to do the Mars and Cancer opposing Pluto and Capricorn again. So it does feel like one door closed in this 3 opposition story arc. Mm-hmm. And I prefer the Mars and Leo for
it's
really
a better
loud
setup for Mars.
Yeah, I think so. Opposing Pluto and Aquarius for a sort of re-energized fight, if you want to lean into it that way. Now, we all experience it. So there's people on the other side that are, but I think if I'm to read it in a way that it does feel like something changes. And I think you're right. What were you saying, Eliza? Like, we still kind of have to wait and see. Like, we still have a long way to go. And I know we used to operate on, what they used to call like October surprise in election season. I feel like we're in like, what's December, January surprise moment. Like we're like,
what's 2025 surprise?
Shocks.
Well, like speaking of retrograde Mars, so this is what I was looking at.
So Mars retrogrades on December 6th, just to locate us in time.
Yeah, Mars retrogrades on December 6th. It stays retrograde until February, which means even though Mars is in Leo now, as we're recording on November 18th, it's going to backtrack into Cancer. And what we were looking at in the last episode was when it does that, retrograde Mars in Cancer will be transiting Trump's Lord of the Year or like planetary guide or avatar of the year, which is Saturn this year for him. That's not really a fun transit to have. No. So, and that's happening around Inauguration Day. So I do wonder if this is maybe me just like clinging desperately to my optimism.
Let's do it.
I do wonder if something is going to happen, and maybe it's just that the dude fucking hates to actually govern. So suddenly he has some work to do.
But also it rules his 6th house of health.
Yeah.
Mars retrograding over your 6th house, your ruler of your 6th house of health in the 12th house doesn't look great. I'm not wishing anybody anything, but I'm just saying astrologically, it's not a good sign of good health.
No, and he's not young. At least 2 people have tried to kill him this year, probably more. Like, who knows? I feel like this has been such a volatile season that I cannot sit here and confidently say this is going to be totally smooth and as expected. Maybe it will be, and I'll be surprised. Maybe it'll all just unroll as it seems like it will at this point. But I do feel like with all of the lumpy astrology and with him just being a very irascible and unpredictable human being, I think there are bound to be a few more surprises. Whatever the nature of them, what the nature of them is, I do not know, but I'm curious, and we're not.
You mean
there
for him through that Mars and Cancer period?
Yeah,
which
like
is January,
if he messes
February.
something up, or if something happens to him, who knows? But we're not there yet, and I am curious what that's going to be like. And maybe it is just as simple as he doesn't actually want to do the work of governing. So the best period of his presidency is before he's actually president, officially.
So the Mars will go over that part of his chart, January, February, and March, and a little bit into April. So the very first, like his 100 days are marked with a pretty awful transit.
Yeah.
as Dimitri would say, maybe, I don't know, Dimitri, you can tell me if I'm wrong, if you'd say this or not. It's like awful for who? Is it awful for him? Is it awful for the people that work for him because it is ruling his 6th house and 7th house? Is it awful for his partners? You know, is it ever awful for him? Don't know. But I could see a ton of firings of like his subordinates because it rules that 6th house and it's Mars wanting to cut everything. And, you know,
I mean,
he does
like
that
he's
anyway.
already done that.
Yeah.
So
maybe
it's
there
like
are more.
It's not a very like profound prediction when you're talking about a Sun Uranus person that's going to change everything always. Okay. So we are in a part of the year. We're in the end of November. We know it's happened thus far in terms of like that first big signature. The next thing to happen is Mars is going to station retrograde on December 6th. And we will then be in a kind of more clunky, harder, crunchier situation, it seems, I think. And then our next episode, we're going to talk about the year 2025. There are some very like standout things that happen right at the opening of 2025. And I think it might be interesting to talk for a second again about Inauguration Day, just because now we know who's probably going to be inaugurated. I keep saying probably. I'm just like stoking the fires of more like, ooh, well, maybe.
Conspiracy theories.
Yeah. We know who's going to be inaugurated on Inauguration Day. So now can we go back and revisit like that? What is a Pluto cazimi that's happening on Inauguration Day? And now how do we see it as unfolding in this hot mess of a cabinet?
I mean, feels like Pluto, the Dark Lord, gets a spotlight.
Yeah.
And in a lot of ways, because
why astrologically?
Yes. So Pluto is the planet of resources, the subterranean power, anything that's kind of hidden beneath the surface, and it will
the underworld.
The underworld. And it's in as it makes it, the sun makes a conjunction to Pluto for the first time in the beginning of Aquarius. It's in the heart, Pluto becomes in the heart of the sun. So it's like that solar moment that it gets that's usually we like a cazimi, right? I think there's a reinforcement of that planet's, it's a purification moment of that planet's significations. Mm-hmm. But because of all these significations that I just named, for the sun to do that feels like I'm just getting this image of like a fluorescent, instead of like a warmth cazimi, it's just like kind of a light that you really don't want, a kind of a glare, in a metaphorical way, and to kind of delineate that astrologically. But all of the people who are kind of now coming out of the woodwork, who want to hoard power, want to subjugate others, want to hoard resources, want money. Really, I don't like, for instance, like Elon Musk and Eliza, you were talking about this last week. People who want power but don't want to govern, or don't want to give up that power to help better other people's lives, are now in a position where they're like in the throne room, so to speak. And that's kind of how I was seeing it. So that people who didn't like even have a career in politics per se, are in big businesses where they now serve in parts of his cabinet that need to actually help people and not big business.
People that were being investigated for sex crimes are going to be the attorney general. Yeah. So like Pluto being like the underbelly of things, and that there being a sun, like leadership sun, Pluto conjunction cazimi, is like highlighting the underbelly and the corruption.
And like an inauguration has so much symbolism around it, right? There's like flags and symbols and Bibles and all this kind of stuff that's like, put your hand on. It's very like that power meets the king, right? Meets the sun, the solar, the sovereign. And so in that moment, it'll be, it feels incredibly hard to talk about because we know what that moment symbolizes. Like the symbolism of that moment feels as though the people then coming from these corruptions, who who are hoarding money and power and have these crazy, like, should not be in politics kind of backgrounds, are now stepping into leadership roles where they have autonomy and they have agency and they have the ability to fire people and move funds around and change people's lives. And I think that now is kind of how the three of us, well, I'll speak for myself, are like looking at that Pluto cazimi in terms of what that means, of that seed moment. In that way, instead of a new way of doing power, we're doing power in a way that feels really gross. Is how
right. So to all the people who were like, this is the dawning of the age of Aquarius. It's like, well, this is also the age of Aquarius. Like, we could get into the age of Aquarius and that the fact that we don't believe in that phrase, but it's like the fact that Elon Musk, it's the fact that Aquarius and Pluto and Aquarius has so many connections to tech and AI and robots and machinery, because it's related to the last industrial revolution, because that was the last time Pluto was around Aquarius, like in and out of Aquarius was part of the industrial revolution. So we know that like machines and machinery have a big part to play with Pluto's transit through Aquarius and how that will impact people. And of course, we and many astrologers have related that in this iteration of Pluto and Aquarius to AI, the robots. And so with Elon Musk, like the guy who, you know, owns the car company, technology, the old
wants
Twitter,
to colonize Mars.
Wants to colonize Mars. Like, yeah. And so it's like the confirmation of him possibly as part of the cabinet, the confirmation of like the oligarch tech overlord as part of the governing situation, along with just a whole string of white nationalists and, you know, accused of being sex offenders, and just like the whole thing is like, wow. I mean, we thought it was bad in 2016, but this is actually looking, I mean, Steve Bannon was pretty good at being bad, but you know, this like
feels
has a
organized.
New flavor of like,
this feels
decrepit.
marinated. Yeah.
I mean, Elon Musk is the richest man in the world. Like
Right.
he has
Pluto.
all of this power, but he also has the means. He has the means to colonize a fucking planet. Like this is just, it is a new level. And yeah, as you just mentioned, Pluto rules wealth. We call it a plutocracy for a reason. It rules wealth in addition to power. And Elon Musk is emerging of these two shadow underbellies of the world. And he's currently being tasked with basically firing all of the civil service or making it more efficient. And it's you know, the things that he finds inefficient are like the environmental agency that stop him from killing birds in order to send his rockets into space. So we've had a Trump presidency, but we haven't had a Trump presidency with all of the guardrails removed. And I think that's what we're about to move into. And it is quite scary. And just, all of the, you know, when Trump won the election, you had all of these AI oligarchs, CEOs, tech bros in charge who are all like, you know, racing to basically kiss his ring or just like bow down to him and curry favor. You know, you had crypto skyrocketing. Like this is definitely going to be favoring one subset of people. And again, I think what's scary is that all of the guardrails around all of these technological advances, around these new currencies, around whatever he wants to accomplish as a president, they're all being removed. It just feels like one giant post-apocalyptic experiment.
Maybe a positive read on the Pluto cazimi happening on Inauguration Day is that it is, in a more subterranean way, something that is galvanizing to the collective and collective power. If you can still, however you can gather that in the face of the 1% just ballooning in its wealth.
When is isn't there a People's March?
I think there's going to be a lot of stuff. Yes. Yeah.
So it'll be interesting to see.
Yeah. How then? Yeah. Yeah.
I wanted to play devil's advocate.
Please, go
just
ahead.
For a second.
Go.
Just one little thing. Obviously, the establishment has always favored money. Like 2008, Obama did the bailouts for the banks who crashed our whole economy. I just have to put that in this episode. We know that, but I think we're all speaking
That's the beginning of Pluto and Capricorn. This is the end of Pluto and Capricorn.
Yes. So we can still follow that astrological and be like, now it feels like those people, it's different. It has this Aquarian flavor, I think is what we're all kind of talking about from space and tech and the way it parallels the Industrial Revolution. And also just wealthy people basically buying their way into government in a blatant, wild way.
Yeah. Great. Okay. So do we want to talk about how the Jupiter and Gemini of it all?
Okay. So let me just spill out in true Jupiter and Gemini fashion, which is the thing that I had been having my eyes on for a couple episodes, so a couple months, is the way that, culturally speaking, candidates leverage like the media in order to get their message forward and to speak to constituents. Okay, we know this, but it always kind of is flavored with whether it's social media, the internet, whatever the new thing is to reach new voters. And what I saw really was like the rise, and there's been articles in the Times, et cetera, and podcasts like talking about this point that the rise of the podcaster is opened up like a totally new way for Trump and Harris, and they both leveraged it to the extent that they could and did to reach new audiences. So Jupiter is the planet. I would say you could match it with politicians, people who speak to the masses, and Gemini, the sign of, communication. It's a Mercury ruled sign. And so if you look at Jupiter and the planet of Gemini, in the sign of Gemini, it's in its detriment. So it's in the opposite of its home. And what was really stunning to me, just like visually and optically speaking, was to see like Trump hunched over in a suit in like someone's like made up set or living room or computer screen, or Harris like in a couch, but she's sitting across from someone who's wearing, someone call her daddy, so somebody who's wearing a sweatshirt. And it really did feel like these politicians were suddenly out of their element and thrust into this new element where people who, on the most part, on the whole, didn't go to journalism school, but had these huge audiences, and in particular, like niche audiences, maybe people who are distrustful of an ABC, a CBS, a Fox even, and really want to hear what does that candidate sound like in just a normal conversation, not on a debate, right? Which we can all say Harris won. And we're in a lot of ways. What is the unpolished? What is the sort of like, do they sound authentic? And I think, and so the New York Times has an article that came out a couple of days ago speaking to this. They called it the manosphere. And we were talking about how that has existed for many years now, like all these YouTubers, streamers, and everything like that. These people who have these large audiences because of social media, and then now Joe Rogan, that 3-hour interview with Trump, just to me, I saw it as sort of like humanizing him, where not like in a way that was so fucked up. I was just like, oh my God, like so many people are going to be like, well, he's one of the dude, or like, I understand him. He's real. And just totally ignore all the fascism and sexism and racism and everything like that, because all of a sudden
it assuages one's fears.
Absolutely.
It's like, oh, well, he might go off, but it's not going to happen to me. So it's like this kind of like Jupiter is in its other sign, the sign opposite from when it is used to being in, and it's the planet of truth and meaning, and the way that the thing that we all might hold as like the principle or the morality test. If it's in the opposite sign, then all of that kind of gets like, it's like marbles on the ground, and it just goes in like a million different ways. So like part of what you're saying is there was just all of these different channels that all of a sudden opened up for them to go through. And Trump didn't have to go through the normal route that all the presidents always had, like the 60 Minutes or the, those kind of channels. He didn't have to go through the normal ways of being like, this is who I am, and this is what I believe in, and this is why you should vote for me. He just got to go rogue and go on all these different.
And the way that at least established media could then say, well, that's not true, right? That's not, there could be some fact checking or something like that. I think when we were going back to the beginning of this, I was looking at 2024 and I was like, I think it's going to be like misinformation online and something that's really, but it felt like it wasn't that. It felt like there were just more other kind of conversations that were completely unchecked, that were trying to get a message across. And I think Trump leveraged that really well, just objectively speaking. And I think Harris tried to do her own thing. The whole thing is a setup. Like,
she didn't go on Joe Rogan. We had this conversation, but apparently it was because she couldn't fit it into her schedule. But the fact of the matter is that since Trump's last presidency, and obviously before that, so we're talking years and years and years, there has been this groundswell of white supremacy, white nationalism, and men feeling disconnected from their role in society, creating networks online in the gaming rooms and in the podcast booths and in all of these things. And they've been steadily at this game for a long time. Like, again, when we don't address the evils of capitalism and extractive workforces and what it actually means to live in a world that does not care about people, it only cares about profits. When we do not address the roots of that evil, everything else will flourish and people will find reasons to turn against each other. Like there cannot be a setup where we are all pitted against each other and anything actually work out, but more of the same kind of bad. So it just also feels like we are talking on the last day of Pluto in Capricorn. And it is like the revealing of all the ways in which our economic systems, our material systems, the Capricorn like structured systems that we live within do not work. And they will only send us deeper into this spiral of unraveling and corruption and supremacy and dominance and all of that thing. Not because that's what Capricorn's about, but because if the structure doesn't work, it doesn't work. Mm-hmm. And Pluto just reveals what is at the root of things. And I just can't help but always go back to that. Like, I wish we could rely on the fucking morality of people, but we can't. That's not how human beings work. That's not how we work so deep into these supremacist systems. This has been a long time. We've been in these systems. We're not just going to be like, well, we're going to hope that everyone's good inside. That's not it. That's just not how our psychology works. We have to uncover the vitriol and the feelings of bitterness and hatred and greed and all of the stuff that like lays underneath that these systems just keep fostering in us. You cannot cover it up and hope everybody can like catch your virtue signaling and wants to be like a good person, because we all have very different understandings of that. The systems that we live within themselves have to demand equality in order for the humans to actually follow it. And our systems do not. We have major corporations getting subsidies from the government, getting our tax money all the time, getting richer and richer and richer and richer off of our money. And then those fund it's just like it doesn't work. None of it works. You can't bail out the banks that are diseased, that are corrupt, that are stealing money from the people. You can't bail out corporations. You can't subsidize like Monsanto. You can't keep pumping money into the thing that's poisoning us and not have everything reveal the rot of that kind of formation. Anyways, Jupiter and Gemini.
I also think there were distractions, the memification, the little moments, the social things, the coconut, like all the kind of things.
All the hype. Yeah.
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 Before we leave,
everyone in a dark hole of despair.
No, that's not what I was going to say. This might make it worse, but I do think it might be worth touching briefly on the parallels to 1968 before we leave this.
I do want to say that. But wait, can I say one more thing? Oh, this is the only, sorry, I'm just like looking at the notes. because we had the Jupiter conjunct Uranus in April 20th, 21st, it was like, I think the tone, if we look at that, we kept saying it was like the seed moment, right? The inception, that moment of what's to come. And it was so, and we were in like student protests, people demanding something different, people calling out corruption in academia, and where is our money going? And I just think it was kind of clear to me that unless, or in this moment, I can see like, unless you were doing something that had that radical, that really addressed things at that root level, that the message could just kind of evaporate, right? It wouldn't really land, because I think already young people, students, people were really, because of Gaza and because it were so important, like the sort of military machine of the United States, the rewarding corporations who are making money off of this military machine, all this, if you didn't have something that addressed that at that root level, we can see it now. It's so obvious that of course it would just kind of poof and not really galvanize people,
right,
to go to the polls.
Right.
Well, that was also Jupiter's like grand finale in Taurus, where it had been for a year. But then I do think when it moved into Gemini, which is, as we've talked about, one of its signs of detriment, it just kind of lost maybe the ability to really concretize or manifest that resistance. It turned to the memes, like you said. Yeah, I think that's true. I do think the left was distracted.
Well, we didn't have any time. There was no time.
There was no time.
There was no time. You know, and we did a lot about the DNC and how awful the astrology was for the DNC, or how challenging it was during the DNC, and how challenging it was for Kamala specifically, for Kamala Harris's chart specifically. And then she had this like glorious moment, and we were all like, wow, okay, I guess we were wrong. And the one thing we all said was, and also, and I don't think this is why she lost the election, but I think it's a huge piece of it's a canary in the coal mine. It's a signification of the problem. You can't let a Palestinian delegate speak at the DNC. And that was the moment that it was like her Venus was being squared and opposed by Mars and Saturn. And it was like this choice. It was like a crossroads that she was at. And her party said, no, Palestinians do not have space on this stage, who are rooting for me, who are trying to get me in. And all three of us were like, well, that could be, one of the great mistakes. And again, I don't know if we don't know what it would have done if she would have, gone in that direction, but it would have done something. And anyways, here we are.
So I think that's a good segue to the parallels with 1968, because as we've talked about, and I know Thea, like you've done a lot of research into this, and you were one of the three of us to really point out how these parallels were manifesting, especially in the spring with the student protests. But that was another election. First of all, it was called like the most volatile election season in history. And I feel like we're rivaling it. Yeah.
Hold my beer.
2024.
It was another election where the mood in the room was dominated, at least in one part, by an anti-war sentiment. So the incumbent president, Lyndon B. Johnson, he ended up dropping out of the race due to opposition to the war. So this was that other time in history where the incumbent president dropped out instead of seeking another term, which is relatively unusual. And it ended up being that his vice president ran and was left with the DNC basically to seek nomination because it was too late for primaries for him. There were two candidates competing in primaries, one of which is Robert Kennedy Sr., so the father of like the anti-vaxxer,
who's now going to be
RFK Jr., who's now the whatever. You don't call them ministers here, do you? The king of health in America.
King of health, which a lot of people are very excited about. I will say probably people that watch this podcast are very excited about.
Wait, that was not sarcastic?
No, I'm not being sarcastic.
Oh. Okay.
anyway, his father was doing very well in the primaries in the 1968 election season until he was assassinated. And who was he assassinated by? But none other than a Palestinian Jordanian man who was opposed to RFK Sr.'s support of Israel. So again, we have these very real echoes to that conflict. And on the day of RFK Sr.'s assassination, Mars and Pluto were exactly squaring each other. So again, we have this same echo of a transit.
Yeah.
And then fast forward a few months. So they were squaring each other from Virgo and Gemini. Fast forward a few months, the election where Nixon won. So Nixon won against the vice president who ran in LBJ's stead. It was a Mars-Pluto conjunction. So we have both of these players who I just find that kind of a stunning parallel with all of the political parallels. We have Israel and Palestine. We have literally the same family, RFK.
Yeah, but also the same eclipses.
Father-son duo. The same eclipses, yes. So we also had eclipses and the nodes in Aries and Libra, with the North Node amplifying war and combat and competitiveness and just
we had a war that
military-industrial complex.
War that the country is heavily doesn't want to be in, but we're deeply in.
And the South Node dwindling peace and accord and harmony and all of that. So there are these I think, in my opinion, quite stunning parallels both politically and astrologically.
And Nixon is a very corrupt leader who ends up getting impeached. And we could say that Nixon opens the door for a lot of what happens, and Reagan and now we're at Trump. It's the same lineage, right?
I think technically Nixon wasn't impeached. He resigned before that.
Sorry.
Could happen.
Right.
But in any case, he left
in disgrace.
In scandal. Yeah.
In scandal.
One could only dream.
No, Eliza, when you found that, I was like, oh yeah, that was what happened. It was he was assassinated because of, Kennedy Sr. was assassinated because of his support of Israel at the time. Which is first of all, we're still in all of this legacy conflict.
Yeah.
So 68 is both
men stealing land, settling colonialism, warring, and all the things.
Yeah.
And then on October 7th, Mars was square Pluto, I believe, in 2023. And it was the first South Node eclipse in Libra. So the October 7th events have the Mars-Pluto. That assassination has the Mars-Pluto. The election has the Mars-Pluto. So these signatures are rough.
And was Saturn was going between Pisces. It was about to go into Aries.
Right.
Or had already gone into Aries.
In 68, Saturn was well entrenched in Aries. But I think it was in 67 where there was the Arab-Israel war. The 6-Day War. I think maybe it was more between signs then. I didn't need to look at the chart.
Yeah.
And Saturn is moving into Aries next year, which is why we bring that up. So we're going to be approaching the Saturn return of that moment.
Yeah. Yeah.
Did we want to talk gender wars? Or do we leave that for
Feels
another time?
Let's top it off with some gender wars. I will say, I don't look forward. I have never taken, I think I've said this in other episodes, but I've never taken Mars so seriously as I have in these last couple of years. I don't know why, but I wasn't really, I think the Mars retrograde around the 2016 elections, whatever year that was, 2017, I think it was something, it was in there. I think I was like, oh, wow. But anywho, when Mars is, it's deep. And of course, Mars, if we want to gender things, then Mars to a lot of people can represent a lot of things. One of them can be men. Doesn't have to. Obviously, it's a kind of very narrow, weird way to look at stuff, but it's definitely an aggressor. So I would be maybe more comfortable saying it represents people that might fight or go to war or do combat or are stealth or warrior or that, I think in its distorted form, it's toxic masculinity. I would say maybe a Mars retrograde might bring up the suck out the poison to try to heal the wound kind of thing of toxic masculinity, maybe. And then Venus, of course, is like women, femmes, queer folks, sex, pleasure, beauty, love, all that kind of stuff. So we're having a Mars retrograde at the end of 2024, beginning of 2025. And just as Mars stations direct, Venus slows down and like a week later, within a week, stations retrograde. So they're very overlapping. They both spend a lot of time in the signs of their Mars is in its fall, Venus will be in its detriment or exile. And so they're both deeply compromised in those signs during a big chunk of their retrograde. So we know that things about gender dynamics, we could say, or about, I would say, like intimate partner violence, I'd say gendered violence. I'd say a lot of those themes are very applicable to signatures when they happen that quickly. And we know, like, one of the things in Project 2025 is that they want to get rid of divorce.
No.
Oh,
Do
it's
they?
like
Being
it's
able,
the,
it's a specific way to say it, being able to divorce.
So that, like, what do you call it? No fault?
No fault.
So no fault, so back in the day, I don't know, it's probably not that long ago, like in the 60s, it's like, it had to be adultery or something. There had to be like a reason, but then we got no fault divorce where you could just say like amicable. And so they want to, that basically closes off pathways to getting a legal divorce.
So you can't get an abortion and you can't get a divorce. So that's like the worst case scenario of happening for obviously humans, the world at large, and also like a dovetailing of a Mars Venus retrograde. Like, what,
Can I say too, like, I think it's worth just pointing out that, so, I mean, Rebecca Solnit wrote an article after the 2016 election talking about the numbers of people she observed anecdotally going door to door, where it seemed like the woman wanted, these were heterosexual couples for the most part. The woman wanted to vote Democrat, and then the husband was clearly a bullying force that wasn't going to let her make her own decision. And this came up recently again in another podcast from The Nation, where she was rightly pointing out that with the increase of at-home ballots, your vote is not actually secret anymore. And it came up also on that podcast that 5% of, I believe it was women rather than just spouses, but I might need to double check that, but 5% anyway of people said that they voted in another way than what they would have wanted to avoid conflict with their spouse or with their partner.
Mm-hmm.
And so this is just like another, I think, insidious, one of the many like multi-pronged ways that abuse can control people and can rear its head. But I think too, in terms of like, so this is all very scary looking forward, especially if we enter a time where it's harder to actually leave the person that you're with. But also I think when it comes to evaluating the election results, it wouldn't shock me if this came into play where actually not everyone was even allowed, like for their own physical safety or emotional safety in their household, to vote the way they wanted to. So I just want to name that as well as we're talking about this.
I do feel hope though, when I do look at the Venus retrograde, because the last time we had this specific Venus retrograding through these signs was, yes, in 2017, yes, when the same person was getting inaugurated, but it was also a major groundswell of activism, obviously a major groundswell of women getting involved in politics. And it wasn't perfect. And a lot of things, went sideways from whatever was started there. And also we have a lot of things that have been set in motion. There is a lot that has been built since that time. There is a good amount of reason to think like we've been here. We were just here 8 years ago. Mm-hmm. We know how this goes and we know this is going to be worse. So we know we have to be way more nimble, way more deeply rooted and connected in community with each other, way more strategic, and way more in this for the rest of our goddamn lives. This is not something you do for a year. This is not something you do for a term of a presidency. God willing, there'll be another election. This is what you do for the rest of your life. This is how you become involved in being a citizen of whatever you want to, a member of your community, a member of your family, a member of your neighborhood, a member of your city, your town, your state, your, country, however you want to look at it, a member of your library. Like, you become a member of something, and you become committed to the relationships around you. And that is how you fight fascism. And that is an everyday, all day, 24/7, 365 event. And I do think that this Venus retrograde is going to land in a way that is going to be quite powerful. And even like, I don't know, it's precursing a lot of stuff going into Aries, which is always a little unnerving, but because the Venus retrograde is going to begin in Aries and go back into Pisces, I do think that there's a lot of fire there for it to work with. And I do think that there is a good amount of rebellious energy, and a good amount of being like the anti good girl, like the bad girl, the femme fatale, the like raging goddess, that will have like a massive groundswell of energy and support. And it's hard in these moments before you see it, but like I've said everywhere, and we said in our newsletter this week, like, do not obey in advance. Do not be defeated in advance. Do not let them enter your psyche and make you feel like this is the end. I know we've gone through some pretty depressing and like kind of just hard, moments, astrologically speaking, but we cannot let that permeate our psyche and our soul.
I mean, I think that's everything. I mean, especially like as a woman, as a Black woman, as somebody who didn't get the right to vote till 1965, like it's pretty recent. Feeling that like that not letting them get into your psyche feels like the thing that it feels really important to remember. And I like what you're saying about the Venus retrograde, even though it'll be in a sign that it's difficult for Venus. It feels like that as you're talking, I'm like, oh yeah, I can see how Venus would be a force, right? Like, and because Venus doesn't do force and like as a planet, like its significations, it does union and harmony and get along, and aren't I cute? And then it's like, okay, but fuck, like in order to have those cute days, I'm going to have to make sure that we're all safe, and I'm going to have to fight, and I'm going to have to, I like what you're saying, like the femme fatale, the sort of like badassery that we can all lean into. I think going and from Aries retrograding into Pisces coming out is like also very interesting astrologically. Yeah. So like the stark difference between being in detriment than to being exalted back into detriment. Like, what does that mean? What does that mean for women's, femmes, queer folk who are, some are in positions of power we might look to in that exalted place, like lead us, help us. And then remembering everyone who doesn't have a platform, I think is also really interesting, or like it could play out in some way, shape, or form. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm just ad-libbing to some of your thoughts.
And I will say that like, in terms of like the term, we say when a planet's in its other place, not the sign that it's supposed to be in, but the other one. So Venus and Aries, where we'll station retrograde for at least for a month, I think, is in its exile. So it's like, it does really like evoke those Lilithian kind of themes of like, okay, well, I'm already exiled, so I have nothing to lose. Like it kind of like frees one up to be fully in their own possession, because if Venus doesn't have to spend its time pleasing other people, if it's already exiled, then what creativity is it actually capable of directing, and how does it want to direct that? And that, I think that will be one of the questions that we sit with. The Venus retrograde is much more complex than just that, but that is one stage of it.
Yeah, I like that.
And Venus goes into its pre-retrograde shadow days after the inauguration. So it just is like it's gonna be starting. And again, it's got its own theme because Saturn will be there because Venus will be in Pisces at that time. And there will be other kind of themes involved. But I do think that just over the course of the whole opening of the year, there's this theme of the what happens during this Venus retrograde, and where will all the Venusian types be, and what will we be doing? Okay, so we've got a new little chapter that we're putting at the end of these, which is called Ask Me Anything. And there was a question about, Eliza, do you have the question?
It's not formulated exactly as a question, but basically what we have here is planets or aspects at the critical/anaretic degree. So the final degrees of the sign. What does that mean?
What does it mean? What does it mean when a planet's at its the end of a sign, like Pluto is at the moment of this recording?
And like Mars and Pluto both were during that fateful opposition on November 3rd.
Yes. Thea famously said they're tired. They're exhausted.
They're at the end.
That they have no gas in the tank. That's it. They're either ruled, if you look at like the bounds, which is like a way of seeing what each degree and each sign is ruled. If they're all ruled by a planet, it's either ruled by Mars or Saturn. So it's said to be not good or bad because it's ruled by one of the malefics. So it's like edgy, I would say, or hard. You know, it's like if you're at the end of something and you're at the end of something, you're tired and it's hard. There's like a roughness to planets at the very end of a sign. So what would you say to people that have like the sun at 29 degrees of Scorpio?
I mean, I always feel
I wouldn't say that.
Maybe this is a little modern, but I always liken these planets to like being in line at customs. So you've like you've gotten to the airport and you're kind of there. You're kind of in the next, you're like really close to just being able to walk out and be in the new city or land, country. But you still have to get through customs. You still have to show your passport. And if not, they can send you back. So it feels very liminal.
I like that.
It feels like you're between places.
But we're not saying you're a cusp.
No. I didn't say the word cusp. I said customs.
Customs. So what does it mean if my sun is at 29 degrees of a sign? Am I just stuck in customs? Do I have a sense of feeling stuck?
I think you feel a little liminal. I think there can be a sense of being like, my business in this land is kind of behind me and I'm moving on out, but I'm not quite out yet. You're still in Scorpio. If you have a birthday at the end of Scorpio and you have a sun at 29 Scorpio, you're still a Scorpio. And that might be a surprise to you if you've never looked at your birth time, the chart with your birth time. But I do think there's a little bit of neither here nor there. And like you said, because the final segments of each sign are in the bounds of either Mars or Saturn, it's like you're the person who is tasked with doing your daily business, the person who's tasked with getting the job done, is a malefic. It's somebody who maybe doesn't use like sweetness and please to get the job done. There might be some shadowy edges to how we get the job done. Does that mean that the person is shadowy? No, but I think it can speak to it. I think it can feel a little more challenging for that planet at the anaretic degree to express itself.
Right. So do you think that like someone with the sun or moon at the last degrees of a sign is like, they might feel like they're always trying to finish something up and get to the next thing? And that it's like hard to get through customs, or you're just like, you're kind of like the like finishing up thing, or are they like a culmination of like wisdom and like, I've done this journey and I've got all these things, and is it like a, end of the lunar cycle kind of vibe where you're like, okay, well, I've done this thing and I'm not impatient anymore because I know the time will come and the things take what it takes? Or
I think it could feel differently in different phases of your life. Like, I think it might make sense to feel maybe a little more impatience or a little more, restless when you're younger. And then maybe with years and with the wisdom that we gain, that can be alchemized into appreciating all that's come before and all that you've, that all that's come with you, all of your marks and your scars, metaphorically speaking.
Right. It's like someone who's impatient, like has road rage in traffic, or someone who's like, well, I guess I'll just vibe. And it's like, when I see those people, I'm like, oh, wow, that's like, you're like a master of like, I would like to be you one day because I'm more prone to like, why is this hiking so long? So it's like, maybe it's the kind of signature in your chart where you can get to a place of like acceptance and being like, well, if we're here, we're here. And that's where we're supposed to be. I'm going to have to look at it more in the charts that I'm with. I don't.
I had one the other day that was like 29-degree Gemini moon. I was like, oh, baby. Like, what is that like? Like, I really entered that with like, like all the words, like, but also just kind of that out breath, like the, like that kind of thing where maybe you're gassed, but like also very much, it's firmly that sign. There's to me, no cusp energy, but it has that quality of being at I like the customs, I like an airport analogy, like a kind of like trying to get through to something else, but it's not there. It's just in that sign. I like the way you read it. In horary, the only thing I wanted to say is, like a chart of the moment, if the ascendant is in those final degrees, it's like, what we say, it's just done. It's called it. There's nothing you can do. So I think that's also an interesting read. Like, just accept if fate is already kind of decided this and there's really nothing you could put your will force in to kind of steer it in a different direction.
It feels a little South Node or Balsamic Moony to me.
Yeah.
It feels like, oh, well, I got to let it go. I gotta go with what this is and just like be in it. I hope that was helpful. I'm going to look for more examples. And if I have some, because I think we think of it a lot in terms of like, oh, this planet's at the last degree and we see things like really finishing up. Oh, I just also wanted to say that every time since 2022, when we've had these like big headlines about like aliens are really here and the government knows about it and they like hang out with them and they have their bodies. Pluto has either been at 28 or 29 degrees of Capricorn. So it's like finishing up a known reality. It's kind of like Pluto at the edge of Capricorn, about to go into Aquarius, which of course everyone would associate with aliens because it's the outsider and it's the, the one on the other, not in the center, but in the, the alien literally. And so I just thought it was fascinating that Pluto's just like hanging out that last degree. Like we're almost at the end of this period of time. We're almost at the end of this phase of reality. And ooh, yes, here's some aliens. Also that Saturn's in Pisces and the aliens are in the water. You're just like it's too on the nose.
All of that. Yeah.
Just wait for Uranus to enter Gemini.
It's going to get weird.
It's going to get so weird. Uranus goes into Gemini in 2025, y'all. With Pluto in Aquarius.
Yeah.
Like two of the outer planets in air signs as we're in a Jupiter-Saturn air cycle. It's going to get weird. Yeah. Anyways, come back. We'll talk about it. We'll do a 2025 edition of Down to Astro that will probably be 7,000 hours long. So it'll bring you through the entire year. We'll have enough airtime to just last you for the whole year. All right. Thank you both so much.
Thank you.
Always a pleasure. All right. Come back. See us next time. Bye for now.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.